Hello, everybody. Kristal here at the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. And today, Kristin Deprey, a constituent of the state of Wisconsin, is joining me. We decided that we should record this because we started talking about advocacy asks and our story or testimony when meeting with our legislators and how our story can be super impactful, which helps elicit support from our legislators. And I asked Kristin to stay on so that she can add anything at the end. And so, yeah, here we go. This is a great opportunity. So for the month of May, it is Fibromyalgia Awareness Month, and May 12th is Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. And advocates and delegates and team leads from a variety of organizations and from a variety of states in the United States are coming together to meet with our congressional representatives and our senators to advocate on behalf of the fibromyalgia community. And our advocacy asks, I'm going to say basic and not get too wordy, but we're asking for increased funding so that it is for fibromyalgia research, and that funding is earmarked for specific driven research to basically identify the subcategory of what fibromyalgia is underneath the neurological umbrella. Because in October, it's October 1st of 2015, actually, the International Classification of Diseases and Disorders reclassified fibromyalgia as a neurological condition, which was great news and a huge step forward for fibromyalgia. However, it kind of left us hanging because there's subcategories under neurological medical conditions. And those are some examples is there's neurological autoimmune disorders. And an example would be something kind of similar would be like MS, which, it does attack the central nervous system. You can end up with lesions in your brain. It can degenerate the myelin sheath of your nerves. So there's a neurological component there where that's an autoimmune disease. The other thing is, the other subcategory is a neurological disorder. And some examples of neurological disorders are migraine disorders or epilepsy. And then there's neurological degenerative conditions. And some examples of medical conditions under that subcategory is Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So what's happened with the fibromyalgia community is we've got the neurological condition classification, but we don't have the subclassification. And without that subclassification, we're kind of left in the wind here because we don't have an identified specialist who will treat people with fibromyalgia. And many of us get bounced around from provider to provider, like neurologists, rheumatologists, pain specialists, pain rehabilitation, medication, doctors, sometimes psychiatry. And this is what we see as a common theme within the fibromyalgia community. So the intent with this funding that we are asking for is to earmark it for specific research that identifies the etiological roots of fibromyalgia under the neurological condition umbrella. So, okay, that's a lot. But how do you do this? How do you convince or elicit the support of your legislators? And the biggest thing there is your personal experiences, your testimony to help create an understanding for this need that will benefit the fibromyalgia community. So I'm going to share my story and tie it into our advocacy asks. So here we go. Hi, I'm Kristal. I am a disabled Army veteran living with fibromyalgia, and fibromyalgia has impacted every facet of my life. And it also interferes with all of my internal bodily systems, which has led to me developing a lot of coexisting medical conditions. And these coexisting medical conditions, more likely than not, I would not have developed them if I did not have fibromyalgia. Due to a lack of specialties, lack of understanding, and lack of research, many doctors and specialists do not understand all the intersectionality going on with fibromyalgia and all these coexisting medical conditions. In my case, I have fibromyalgia, and I ended up developing irritable bowel syndrome, costochondritis, chronic fatigue, and another one is Raynaud's syndrome. Raynaud's syndrome can create a situation where your blood vessels and arteries spasm and constrict, which reduces blood flow. Most recently, in January of 2023, I had a heart attack at the age of 47. I am a little bit below my BMI for my age. I am a good weight. I do engage in physical activity, and I eat healthy to the point where I'm borderline vegan. So I don't really meet the criteria for a heart attack. And when I was being treated by the cardiologist in the emergency room, I explained I had Raynaud's syndrome. They did go in and do a catheter procedure where they found that there was no blockages in my arteries. They were as clean as a whistle, no cholesterol buildup or plaque. But they did find that the Raynaud's caused the artery in my heart to spasm. And as a result, I had a heart attack. It's very likely that if I did not have Raynaud's, I would not have had a heart attack. And the reason why I have Raynaud's is because I have fibromyalgia. Yet there's very little literature and medical research on this. And this is why it's so important to have specific driven research on fibromyalgia, because people with fibromyalgia, such as myself, are at high risk of health and safety conditions. And as a daughter, of my mother, obviously, but you know, one of my goals in life is to outlive my mom. And the reason being is because my brother passed away in 2004. And for me, this is really personal because this is something that could be so easily remedied with increased funding that is appropriated for specific research for fibromyalgia to identify the underlying root causes and helping classify fibromyalgia appropriately so that we have an identified and assigned medical specialty, and that they're knowledgeable and become experts on all these intersectionalities that happen between fibromyalgia and all these coexisting medical conditions we have. Increased funding of research will improve the quality of life for everybody living with fibromyalgia, not just my own, but also reduce the risk of life-threatening medical conditions as a result of having fibromyalgia. Thank you for allowing me the space to share my experience and testimony, and I look forward to partnering with you on this initiative to ensure that the needs of the fibromyalgia community are being met through our healthcare systems. So that is an example of a story or testimony to help you advocate for your advocacy asks. And now I just want to open it up to Kristin for a few minutes here. And I want you to be honest with me and tell me, like, do you feel like I hit the advocacy asks? Were there emotional hit points that were true? What are some things I could have added? Because I trust your opinion. I've known you for a while, and when we've collaborated before, and you're honest and diplomatic, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yes, I think you absolutely hit the emotional advocacy acts and emotional points in your story and your testimony. You were very eloquent in what you said. You were very to the point in your story, as well as, you got across what you needed to say for your ask, with still having the empathy in your story as in your ask, and excuse me, I'm sorry, and explaining it as a bigger system, and that it's not just you that needs the funding, it is our community as a whole. This is why you're asking, because you've had this experience, but you're asking because our community has had experiences like this. Our community needs this help. Our community is struggling because of the lack of funding to find out why we are ill, to find out, the reason behind our illness and the coexisting. I think you had very good points in talking about the coexisting, intersections of the of having fibro as well. People don't always know that. People who don't have fibro don't realize that there are many things that go along with that. So mentioning that is very helpful to those that aren't familiar with fibromyalgia, which could easily be our representatives and people that aren't, that are in statewide, federal, that sort of thing. There's a lot of people that aren't familiar with fibromyalgia. There are doctors that aren't familiar with fibromyalgia, and that could be something that could be added as well. There are still doctors that don't believe in fibro. So that would be, I think, maybe add, right. What's that?
No, I said that's a great point, and normally that's a piece I add in, but I forgot because I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. But yeah, that's the other point, and that is a point for me to remember when I'm sharing my testimony, is to also outline that we still have medical providers, not as many as we used to, but we still have it, and it's a pervasive stereotype where they don't believe fibromyalgia is real, despite the tangible physical evidence that has been found, how it affects our small nerve fibers and the retinal nerve layer in our lining in our eye, and that we have inflammation in our, the glial cells in our brain, which, this is all neurologically related. Nerves are neurological and the cells. And so that's a great point. And this is why I enjoy these free flow conversations and sharing our personal testimonies, because it reminds us oh, this is an important point as well. And I appreciate you pointing that out.
I think another thing, oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think another thing that can be added, and maybe this is somebody else's personal testimony, depending on how many testimonies we bring. But for myself, it was how many years it took to get diagnosed. I think that is something that is a lot of people's experience. Years, absolutely years, because my first rheumatologist didn't believe in fibro. So I ended up on medications for cancer. I ended up on other methotrexate, different medications. What was one of the other ones? I can't remember at this point, but I ended up on a lot of different medications that I shouldn't have been on, because she misdiagnosed, had me convinced it was this. And I was just begging for an answer for my pain. At that point, you think you've just, you just want answers so that you can be feeling better. So you believe your doctor, at that point. And that's where you gravitate. Okay, sure, this is what she or he says. So you're going to believe them. And again, it goes down to doctors that don't believe. But again, to go back to the original, I think that a lot of people's stories involve getting misdiagnosed or just not being heard. And taking years to be diagnosed. And within that, the coexisting conditions, if there isn't a doctor, this umbrella doctor that we don't have at this point, we're going to several different doctors. We've got rheumatologists that see us, neurologists that see us, endocrinologists, primaries, GI. We have all these doctors and nobody's seeing this big picture of the whys. And, so I digress a little because this isn't as much advocacy, but it's people's experiences. And, these are great testimonies to go to your reps and say, this is why we need more funding. These are the reasons. This is my story. These are other people's stories too, and this is why ultimately, we need this research so that the community can be better. The community can, not, the community can live in a space in which we are better, feeling better. Obviously, we're not going to be perfect. This is a lifelong thing, but if we have answers, we will be in a position in which we can potentially be treated in a way that is different than right now.
It would improve
and
it would improve our
quality
of life, and we would have
correct. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and we would have better health outcomes, because and it's not to say that we would be cured. It's not to say
Correct.
that we could be fully functional as we were prior to our diagnosis, but it would be improved.
Correct.
And, the thing that's important about that is the only way we can improve these outcomes and improve quality of life is having that medical research in place and having that medical education available to licensed medical providers, but also patients. I always say knowledge is power, and it's your most powerful tool. And that the more you know, it's not going to necessarily solve the issue of having fibromyalgia, but there's other things. Having that knowledge can reduce like anxiety, and it's one of those things that I personally, like, I have friends that joke, and my mom and I have even talked about this. Like, I could be quite a few episodes on the show House if it was still running, because of all these like medical anomalies and nuances that I had, and weird surgeries. And like, I had my gallbladder removed, and that was in 2010, and there's just no rhyme or reason. But when you look at fibromyalgia, and I wasn't diagnosed yet, and that was another thing you brought up. It took many years. I wasn't officially diagnosed until 2014, but it was put on my radar in 2007. But when I sat down, I'm fortunate, I live outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and it's like dubbed a medical mart. And there was, they moved to a different state, but there was a rheumatologist that specialized in fibromyalgia. So she knew a lot of these nuances that happen with people medically with fibromyalgia, that there's a tie-in somewhere, and not necessarily directly with fibromyalgia, but how fibromyalgia increases the risk of developing other medical conditions that become coexisting. And your gallbladder is part of your digestive system, and a lot of people develop digestive issues or irritable bowel syndrome. And so indirectly, my fibromyalgia had affected my gallbladder to the point I had to get it removed. And so, it's one of those things that if we know these things, that kind of calms our anxiety. It's not necessarily as a patient, it's going to fix things, but it calms our anxiety. And then we can focus on the different areas of fibromyalgia and the coexisting medical conditions, and look at not just medical approaches, but holistic modalities. And by holistic, I mean it as WHOLE, because we got to look at our whole person, physically and mentally, and what things are within our control to help that. So again, but we're limited. And if we had more of the, research-based evidence on fibromyalgia to help better understand the mechanisms and help educate both providers and patients alike, then again, that's where we see the increase of quality of life. So someone with severe fibromyalgia might only be able to walk 15 minutes, right? But if we have some understanding and develop pathways to create treatments and other means to manage, then that person could end up working or not working, but walking. Well, walking can be,
Right.
I'm just saying, they could end up walking 30 minutes a day. And then
Right.
when you're at that 30 minutes, you're hitting that cardio, the recommended cardio,
Right.
which reduces, helps your heart, helps your circulation. So, and that's the whole thing, is that there is this symbiotic relationship all throughout our body. Like if one thing goes, like dominoes, then everything else. And that's how fibromyalgia is, and many other chronic illnesses. And the point of I'm gonna kind of bounce back here, and you, so it's not really advocacy with the stories and all this other stuff, but it really is, because I always have said that your story is the most powerful, empowering, and impactful thing you have. It's your sword of advocacy. And not only is it your sword of advocacy, it's a sword of advocacy that is lit on fire. Because first, your book of life, your journey can become someone else's survival guide, right? The other thing is, you are being vulnerable and raw with your legislators. And what happens is it humanizes you in the process and the problem. And so the testimonies and our personal stories are really the driving force that is for the advocacy asks. And it's also important to be diverse and have a variety of stories and represent people. You know, the fibromyalgia community, we say that a lot. The fibromyalgia community is a community, but we have sub communities within our community. An example, and I still do this, and this makes me so angry, and I just want to be like, oh, stop posting this on social media or putting this out. It's so incorrect. We are constantly seeing that fibromyalgia is a woman's illness, right? But there's all this research that says, no, it's not. And actually, even some recent research in 2018 indicated, for researchers out of Wisconsin, have indicated that fibromyalgia sufferers, about 40% are men. And then there's other research that indicates that 1% to 2% of fibromyalgia sufferers are children and adolescents. So basically anyone 19 years and younger. And when you look at those two things, and you're up to like 42% between men and children and adolescents, I mean, it's like when you're looking at those things, it's not predominantly a women's illness. And I just saw like an awareness video, and they put something like 83% of fibromyalgia sufferers are women. And I'm like, this is so damaging for our community, because it is basically compounding these pervasive stereotypes, and then men don't feel supported. And then the other thing is bringing into the loop, which is important for research, is like there's like no research. I mean, there's a little bit on suicide risk and fibromyalgia in relation to the LGBTQ community, because they're at higher risk of suicide compared to the general population. And then when you start adding in other variables that are detrimental to their well-being, their mental health, and their physical health, then that risk of suicide goes up. And sadly, there's not any qualitative peer-reviewed medical research on the impacts of fibromyalgia on the LGBTQ communities, and there's not for Native Americans. And so then there's research out there when you're looking at chronic pain, which is one of the top 3 tier symptoms of fibromyalgia. There's research out there of unconscious bias of medical providers on how they approach the treatment of individuals based on color. So, you know, if a man, according to the research study, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, but I've shared the links and stuff, but when they were looking at this situation of medical providers, like, why are we seeing like white males are more likely to receive treatment for chronic pain compared to Hispanic males, and why is there a disconnect with Asian Indian populations with pain management protocols? Because they, you know, some of this research found that this unconscious bias is that they don't need this support because those communities, you know, historically are not super vocal about what's going on from a cultural reason.
Mhm.
The other thing is
Mhm.
veterans are often left out of the conversation. Not in
Right.
recent years, obviously, and those are things that are important, is to make sure, again, it's part of amplifying people's testimonies to show how many
Mhm.
people are being impacted in a variety of communities and cultures and gender, sexual orientation, all that stuff. And that it shows
Mhm.
that fibromyalgia doesn't discriminate. And anybody of any age and creed and race and color can develop fibromyalgia. And yet, not only is fibromyalgia research lacking, there's definitely not
Mhm.
research that is targeted towards these communities within our community. And so it's
Mhm.
important to your testimony, as I said, it's your sort of advocacy that's lit on fire. And then
Mhm.
having that making sure you're being inclusive and diverse in representing the fibromyalgia community is just as important and
Mhm.
impactful. So, and I'm really glad. So, just so you all know, Kristin and I were actually meeting today to talk about things related to advocacy and our what we're working on and how we can support each other. And we started talking about your personal story and whatnot. And then I was like, on an earlier topic, I was like, I should have recorded that. And then when we started talking about the personal story, Kristin was like, are you recording this? Let's record this. And I was like, I'm going to record it. And so here we are. Just not, on a wing and a prayer, we're winging it. Yeah. But yeah, so I appreciate you allowing me to record this. I feel like this is going to be a great informational video that is very down to
Mhm.
earth and not
Yeah.
it's not so polished. And so I find that for me personally, when I'm trying to learn how to do something, if it's spoken in my language, it's a lot easier for me
Mhm.
to digest and feel less intimidated trying
Mhm.
to do what a person is saying. You can do it, and here's how, if it's not something I've done before.
Mhm.
So
Right.
again,
And
do
I
you have any other
really,
points?
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you have any other points before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I just wanted to basically just, thank you again for, having this conversation with not only myself, but, putting it out there for everyone else, sharing that story and that, what do you call it? Your lightning bolt?
This
No.
sort of advocacy that's on fire, lit on fire.
Oh, yes, your fire. Thank you for sharing your fire. But no, thank you for sharing your story as well, because, everybody's story helps. And, what you do with your advocacy helps. And all the testimonies help. Getting this funding, all of this is one step closer to, again, quality of life for a group of people, quality of life for individual people, and what you're doing. I know you don't think of yourself as, see, I knew it. You don't like to be thanked, etc. But I think you need to be thanked every now and then. So thank you for all of that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate you. You know what? It's a community effort, and
Sure.
I honestly wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people who trusted what I was doing in my process in different areas, along with other advocates and organizations being willing to basically team up as a coalition to
Mhm.
address different issues affecting the fibromyalgia community, not just with legislative advocacy, but informational
Mhm.
interview videos and awareness campaigns. So, and that's, to wrap this up, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's legislative advocacy or awareness campaign or educational videos. The underlining variable here of success is working together, because the best way to
Mhm.
advocate is to collaborate.
Mhm.
And I'm going to end it on that
That's right.
note. I'm going to end it on this note,
That's right.
on a high note. So make sure you collaborate when you advocate, because you will be more successful with whatever advocacy efforts you are engaging in. And until next time, make sure you make your self-care your number one priority. Love yourselves and love each other.